Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Sabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Alright children, today we're going to do another apocryphal story, or technically stories. This is going to be the calling of the other disciples. So in our previous videos we've discussed how Jesus in the Gospel of John called Peter, Andrew, James and John, and then called Philip and Nathaniel. And then in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, how Jesus called Matthew. And then in our previous video, we did an apocryphal story of how Jesus called Simon the Zealot. And now today, we're going to discuss how Jesus called his other 4 remaining 12 apostles. Thaddeus, Thomas, James the Less, and Judas Iscariot. And the reason we're doing this as one video is because, unlike our previous video, we were able to do an entire story around the life of Simon the Zealot, we don't really have a lot of information regarding the calling of these other 4 disciples. The one we probably have the most information on would be the calling of Thaddeus. So according to church tradition, before Thaddeus was called, he was a farmer. And one day he was out working in the fields, out there plowing in the fields, and Jesus came to him and called to him and said, "Come, follow me." And so Thaddeus gave up being a farmer and went and joined one of the disciples of Jesus. And as for the other disciples, Thomas, James the Less, and Judas Iscariot, we don't really know much more about them. So with Thomas, we don't know exactly how he was called or even what he did. What we do know is that Thomas is referred to as the twin in the Bible, and therefore Thomas obviously had a twin brother who, for whatever reason, was not called to be one of the disciples of Jesus. And this is a little bit odd because when Jesus calls Andrew and John, they bring along their brothers Peter and James. And so when Jesus goes and calls Thomas, he doesn't bring along his twin brother. His brother could either be dead or just wasn't a believer. And while tradition says Thaddeus was a farmer, we don't really know what Thomas did before he was called. He seems to have done some kind of physical work. Some traditions say he was a carpenter, some say he was a stonemason. So he seems to be a bit of a sort of a builder. And so he was a builder of some sort before he was called as a disciple. Next we come to James the Less. And we don't know much about him either. The Bible tells us that his mother is Mary Clopas, most likely Mary the daughter of Clopas. We're told that James's father is Alphaeus. Some church fathers think that Alphaeus and Clopas are just 2 different names for the same guy, and that when the Bible refers to James's mother as Mary of Clopas, that they meant Mary the wife of Clopas, whereas other theologians think that Alphaeus was James's father, and that when they say Mary of Clopas, they mean Mary, daughter of Clopas. It's also believed that Clopas, or Cleopas, is one of the 2 disciples that met Jesus on the road to Emmaus. And if that is the case, then this would mean that James's maternal grandfather is one of the 2 disciples that Jesus met on the road to Emmaus. Other than that, we don't know much more about James. Some people think maybe a fisherman or maybe some other job. So we don't know much more about him. And our final figure is Judas Iscariot, the disciple who would betray Jesus. And like the other disciples mentioned in this video, very little is known about Judas. Judas is known as Judas Iscariot. Iscariot means man of Kirioth. That's a city located in southern Judea. And it is very likely then that Judas is from that town. what is interesting then is that the other 11 disciples are all believed to have come from the area of Galilee. Guys like Peter and Andrew and James and John and Philip are said to have come from the city of Bethsaida. Simon and Nathaniel are mentioned to have both come from the city of Cana. Matthew possibly comes from the city of Capernaum because that's where Jesus called him. And while we don't know where the other disciples are from, they may have also come from the area of Galilee as well. Whereas Judas, being called Judas Iscariot, means he comes from the city of Kerioth, which is in the area of Judea and not the area of Galilee. Other than that, we don't really know much more about Judas. There is one tradition that believed that Judas was a son of Sadducees. So in the same way that St. Paul was born to Pharisee parents and grew up to become a Pharisee, some people think that Judas was actually born as a Sadducee and raised to become a Sadducee before he was called by Jesus to become a disciple. And that then, children, not only wraps up this video, but that wraps up our series of videos on the calling of the 12 apostles. So I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.